Could any man alive, be so deserving of such a hatchet job? And I suppose the answer is, it's Randy Andy. Of course he is. Because he is so stupid, he is prey to those around him. Most obviously Epstein, but also courtiers. Yes, I mean, you look at his record of popularity. Meghan is about 4 times as popular as Andrew. Meghan.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm William Moore, the Spectator's features editor. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Alexander Larman, the books editor of Spectator World, that's the Spectator's American edition, and the author of a trilogy of books about the House of Windsor, most recently Power and Glory. He's joining me today to talk about a shocking and devastating new book about Prince Andrew. It's by Andrew Lownie, and it's entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. We're going to get into all of that now. Alexander, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here again.
So, we've had a lot of stories about this book in the press over the last few weeks. It's been serialised in the Mail. It's made a lot of splash, I think it's fair to say, with quite a lot of shocking claims about Prince Andrew. You, having read it, could you give our viewers a bit of a sense of perhaps some of the most extraordinary claims that this book makes?
Well, I mean, what it amounts to is a 400-odd page demolition of what remains of a character, not only of the Grand Old Duke of York, but also of his wife, Sarah Ferguson. And it's a fascinating book, but as I said in my review, which I believe is in a future issue of Spectator, was one that's written with absolute vitriol, so much so that I got to the end, and I began to feel a bit sorry for Prince Andrew, because I thought, could any man alive, be so deserving of such a hatchet job? And I suppose the answer is, it's Randy Andy. Of course he is. But nonetheless, the sheer level and accumulation of vile and gross detail about all things Andrew, which begin with the revelation that he lost his virginity aged 11, a prostitute hired by his father no less, and then it ends with all these horrible revelations of his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein, who apparently had compromise on the Duke of York, which involved either filming him having sex or at the very least having very specific details of his sex life, which was then sold to people ranging from Mossad to Colonel Gaddafi. It just goes on and on and on, because you find that Andrew was called Baby Grumpling, that he was always an unpleasant child since growing up to be an unpleasant adult. And it's fascinating because of everybody in the royal family, he has been an embarrassment for a very long time now. He's been somebody who is a stain on the very fabric of the British monarchy. And so Andrew Lownie's book is a very valuable addition to this conversation, but what I couldn't help feeling, as a destruction of Andrew's character, it goes so far and so deep, you begin to think, does he have any redeeming features whatsoever? And what was funny for me is I'd always thought that the rot set in relatively late. I thought that Andrew's quite distinguished service in the Falklands, which Lownie rubbishes and belittles, actually showed that he was, because obviously famously he was his mother's favourite son, but he was essentially an upstanding figure for quite a long time. It was only in recent years that the Randy Andy, Air Mars Andy stuff gave way to the idea of his potentially being a sexual abuser in league with Epstein. But what you start to think reading this book is he's always been unpleasant. He's always been somebody who's been so vile to everybody around him that he essentially doesn't have any redeeming features. And what was interesting is that Dr. Lownie has said in various interviews that he is a monarchist. Well, you could have fooled me, because it's about as swinging an attack on the institution of the monarchy that can still allow this man to be at its heart. You can imagine.
So it's very interesting. So you're saying that actually, by extension, it's not just an attack on Andrew himself. It is the entire institution.
Yes, I think what he does, potentially inadvertently, but I don't think so, because Dr. Lownie is a very intelligent man, is to say the royal family is no longer fit for purpose if it can harbour somebody like Andrew at its heart, because there's a lot of very interesting, very specific detail about money in the book, because the question a lot of people will ask is, how does Andrew still maintain this lifestyle? He has no job, he has no obvious source of income, and yet he is leading a multi-millionaire playboy existence even now. And of course, what Lownie explores in the book is the nature of these various rather dodgy overseas contracts and all of these various people he's been in league with. But the question you have to ask is, the royal family have always been opaque when it comes to money. They've always had a dubiousness about letting the accounts come into the open. And The answer, the reason why, if you believe this book, is that essentially they have things to hide, and it's not just Andrew, who's somebody who is squirreling away the family silver as fast as he can. It's the entire institution of the monarchy.
Given how wild some of the claims are made in this book, has there been any official response from the royal family about any of them? I believe the Duke of Sussex's lawyers have been in touch with the Daily Mail about a story that involved him, which I would love to know I'd love you to explain a bit more for the viewers in a moment. But has there been any other response from any other part of the royal family?
Well, what's very interesting is that if Andrew tries to sue, and there are numerous things in the book that I, obviously an untrained mind, would describe as libel. I mean, plain and simple, on the grounds that if you were to read this book, you would think less of Prince Andrew and it is damaging to his reputation. But there hasn't been any public comment. There hasn't been any kind of attempt to sue, because obviously Andrew, like his brother, like his mother, would take the classic royal family mantra of never complain, never explain. It's not going to go away. This book is going to be an absolute stain on what remains of Andrew's character until the day he dies and possibly beyond. I mean, it's going to be a massive bestseller. I'd be astonished if it didn't sell, much better than his other books, and I think that it's going to be the talking point book of the year. But in terms of the Duke of Sussex, what's fascinating and quite hilarious, actually, is there's a story about Harry, before he met Meghan, that he got into an argument with Andrew and ended up giving him a bloody nose. And various details like this, and Andrew saying that the marriage to Meghan wouldn't last a month because he hadn't done due diligence. All of this was put in the Mail's serial, and the Duke of Sussex not only denied it very firmly via his lawyers, but also issued a writ, which is quite interesting because we have this idea that Harry is deeply litigious. But of course the funniest part is he didn't need to be deeply litigious, because actually in the excerpts published he doesn't come across that badly. It's Andrew who comes across badly, although I'm quite surprised to find that apparently Harry refers to Andrew as a poofter, amongst other things. And given that Andrew has apparently slept with over 1,000 women, I would say that is demonstrably untrue.
Goodness. Well, you wrote a piece for the Spectator's website before the book was published, which had the headline, "Could Prince Andrew's reputation sink any lower?" Now you have read the book. Would you care to answer that question?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes, because what is quite clear about Andrew is there are an awful lot of skeletons in the cupboard. But if you are being charitable, and let me be charitable for once, because I'm not normally charitable about Andrew.
We'll never accuse you of that.
No. He is a deeply stupid man, and because he is so stupid, he is prey to those around him, most obviously Epstein, but also courtiers, people in the royal establishment who are much more intelligent than he is, and therefore have been giving him very poor guidance, because he's somebody who, I mean, there's all this detail about how his time at Gordonston, he was academically negligible. I mean, there was no question he was going to university because he just wasn't good enough. And it's quite interesting that he's never been an intelligent man. You can see that he's essentially a big overgrown child, and you can see that his sense of humour especially is that of a child. But what you can also see is that Andrew's reputation has for a very long time relied on the fact that he is a core, or was I should say, a core member of the royal family. What's been interesting under Charles is there's a bit of a push-me-pull-you situation. On the one hand, he is excluded from many of the royal events. He isn't allowed to walk with the royal family to the Christmas service at Sandringham and so forth. And then he pops up, and he's there all over again. And you keep thinking, what do you want to do? You either cast him out of the royal family altogether, which is very difficult to do, because ultimately it's never been done. I mean, you can have a level of freezing somebody out, but actually stripping them of all royal titles, making him plain old Mr. Windsor, and sending him off into private life would be quite difficult, because obviously he is a wealthy man, and the question as to where this money has come from is quite a large part of the book. And the question I think a lot of readers are going to have is, well, why on earth should this have been allowed to happen in this day and age when we live in a society probably more riven with inequality than it's ever been? How can somebody like Andrew have prospered and prospered and prospered because of who his mother was? So I think there's that interesting aspect to it as well. But in terms of how people are going to regard Andrew, you might be like me. You might actually get to the end of the book and begin to think, well, I would have liked to have seen the other side, because a lot of the girlfriends he's had don't talk about him that disparagingly. They talk about him in terms of actually having quite a nice time with him. But of course, there's always somebody to put the other side, the side of the prosecution. I just think after a while, who are all these people who hate him so much?
Yes, well, so he's, as you say, he's in this slight, I suppose, limbo at the moment of not being an active member of the royal family, but obviously still, as you say, not Mr. Windsor. Is there any route you can see for him back into active royal life, or is that bridge just totally burnt at this point?
I think it was the Newsnight interview that did for him in 2019. I mean, I think after that, there was no point back. I mean, because I was going to say, yes, perhaps if he was to sue and the case was to go in his favour, then perhaps. But on the other hand, the last time he tried to sue anyone, it went very, very badly. And he ended up having to pay $10 million to Virginia Roberts. So I don't think anybody's going to be advising him to take any form of legal action. But if he doesn't clear his name in a court of law or in any sort of court of public opinion, no, there's no way back for him. And of course the question is, when William becomes king, if the Duke of York is still knocking about, William hates him. I mean, in the book he's quoted as calling him a tosser, but one of his rather stronger epithets being used in private. And I mean, it's perfectly possible that if William really wanted to make a big sweeping gesture when he became king, throwing his uncle to the wolves might be it.
There's another side to that equation, I suppose, which is how the public view Andrew. Do you think we're also at a point now in history where Andrew's become such a punching bag, arguably for some pretty understandable reasons, but have we got to a point where the public almost want to believe anything they hear about Andrew?
I think there's that appetite, isn't there? Because if this book had been written about Prince Edward, I think it would have been a much more interesting book, because Edward is very much a member of a royal family who goes under the radar. I know very little about him. I know there's been a concerted attempt to make his wife Sophie a more popular figure, a more central figure to the royal family. But Edward, for years, seemed to be this rather wishy-washy, rather strange character. And I don't think I've ever written a Spectator piece about him, which says it all, really. But he's interesting, because why is there no attention paid to Edward? So, I don't know. If a book like this had been written about Edward, it would have been a much more interesting book, because it really would have come up against a lack of preconceptions, whereas with Andrew, yes, I mean, you look at his record of popularity. Meghan is about 4 times as popular as Andrew. Meghan. That says it all, really.
Very finally, on the subject of Meghan, I think I'm going to have to get you to eat your words a bit, Alexander, because when you were here for one of our recordings in the past, you made a very confident prediction for our viewers, where you said that there is no way that Meghan and Harry's Netflix deal will get renewed. Their $100 billion Netflix deal. It has now been renewed. So I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Will, when I saw this news initially, I was all set to get out the sackcloth and ashes. I thought to myself, my reputation as a royal pundit has forever been destroyed. I will never hold up my face in public again, etc., etc., etc. Then I looked at the small print, and of course what has transpired is that their $100 million deal has not been renewed. What they've done instead is to sign a first-look deal with Netflix, which essentially means Netflix now have first refusal on all of their programmes. This is by no means a guarantee they'll produce any of them. So what I would argue is that it isn't, in fact, I was going to say a rude word, a refutation to people like me. It's much more a case of everybody involved trying to save face. We are going to see a second series and a Christmas special of With Love, Meghan, which is punishment enough for us all this year. But will we see more documentaries in the future? I don't know. But it's certainly, the heyday has passed, the moment has passed, and I don't think the next 5 years is going to be anything like as eventful as the last.
Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on when the second season of With Love, Meghan airs, and would love to know your thoughts about it. Alexander, thank you very much indeed for joining me.